What's up everyone, it's Brandon with GrizzlyWorks RC. In this video we are going to be looking at the assembly of the Super Kei chassis. There's a lot of parts to this truck, or to this chassis kit, so I figured I'd make a video to show where everything goes and some of your different mounting options. I'm also going to talk about some of the things you need, because with this chassis there's some particular things that you're going to want to have or to do with this chassis as far as parts are concerned. And I'll run through all of that and let you know some of the options that you have for them. So first, let's talk about what you get with the kit. Obviously, you're going to get your frame rails, kind of designed after the Kei truck shape from little trucks in Japan. You're going to get a light bar that goes on the front. This is meant to house the stock, or the 3mm LEDs that come with pretty much all of the SCX24 trucks. You're going to get a front and rear cross support, which also acts as, both of them act as limiting strap mounts, because you can run a limiting strap front and rear on this truck. You are going to get a cab roof, and a rear cab goes on the back of the cab, so can mount some stuff to it, but it's more for looks than anything else. You're also going to get a tray for where the bed would be on the truck. Skid plate that comes with it is also adjustable for the transmission, so you can move the transmission. There's 4 different mounting positions on there. That helps with clearance options for depending on the motors that you're running and what orientation they're in. You're also going to get a pretty large assortment of screws, and there's going to be some nuts in there. An assortment of limiting straps so that you can run whatever size you need to on the front and rear. And then there's a couple of spacers and little screws, which I'll get into because those are for specific things that not everybody's going to need, but they're going to come with the kit anyway. Let's talk about some of the things you're going to need for assembling this truck that aren't included with the kit. First off, we're going to talk about axles, because that's probably the biggest thing on this. The kit, or the chassis, is actually slightly wider than a stock SCX24 chassis. Because of that, you can sometimes run into some weird suspension dynamics. I'll kind of demonstrate with these 2 shocks here. On a stock chassis, your shocks will run parallel to each other. Some aftermarket chassis are a little bit narrower because they're thinner material, so they can actually kick the suspension in a little bit. Because this one is wider, it's actually going to kick the upper part of the top part of the suspension out slightly, which can cause some weird dynamics when you're side hilling or when the truck's doing any sort of articulation. It can also cause some binding depending on the shocks that you're using. So what I recommend is running a wider axle that has a wider mounting point for the links and shocks on it. I have tried a few different axles on here. I've tried stock axles. They do work. They're just a little bit narrow. You can run some spacers for the shocks to kind of space them out a little bit. But if you're running stock axles with stock width on there, you are going to run into some clearance issues for steering up front. You're going to have to limit your steering so that you're not hitting the tire on the actual shock itself, unless you're running something that's set out really wide, which you can do that. You can run like a 4mm extension on your axle shafts. It's an option that you can do. And that'll set it out wide enough that you can run like a 1 or 2mm spacer for the lower shock mounts. But what I recommend is something like the Super 8 axles that I have here. These are the injection molded ones, because the mounting points for all of that is already outset wider, and you have a much wider axle, which is going to give you stability all around. Even with putting the shocks and links wider, it's also going to give you more stability. I tried the Mofo X15 axles on here too, but then realized that they have the same with mounting points for shocks and links. I know there's like the Mias ISO axles, but I don't know their mounting, how wide the mounting points are on that. And I have seen some super wide aluminum axles, but again, I don't know if they're if the shock and link mounts are set out or not. But you have options. If you want to run a stock setup, you can do it with spacers. Just know that you may run into some clearance issues or some funky suspension dynamics if you don't deal with the shocks being pointed out up top instead of in or parallel to each other. Let's talk about shocks since we're kind of on that subject. You can run stock length. That works fine on here. I don't recommend going any longer than, these are the Endura 42 or 41 millimeter oil-filled shocks. I don't recommend going any longer than that because, again, you run into clearance issues up front unless you're running a super stretched out setup, because you will have issues with your top mounts, your top shock mounts. Things like double barrels are way too long for it, again, unless you're running a super stretched out front end, which doesn't really work all that great with this chassis because of the way it's designed. Or if you're running the truck a bit higher, which again is kind of against the reason this chassis was designed, which was meant to be super low and have lots of clearance even though it sits low. So you're also going to need your suspension links. On the topic of clearance, I highly recommend some double bend style links, especially in the rear, just to get as much clearance as possible for when you're going over rocks and going over sharp angles and stuff. They really do help out a lot. I personally like the Maz Designs suspension links. I run them on basically all of my SCX 24s. These are his double bend design, the stainless steel ones. And the main reason I like his links, other than just the quality in general is really good, the link ends on here are injection molded and they hold up to a lot of abuse that a lot of other links in general don't hold up to. I've never had a problem with one breaking or slipping or anything like that. Plus they are slightly adjustable for length because of the design of having the screw-on style link ends. So I know that's kind of a plug for Maz, but I really do like his suspension links. So highly recommend them. But you can run stock links or just regular high clearance links and still be able to get plenty of performance out of this chassis. I recommend just a straight Gladiator or Power Wagon setup. I've tried everything from super stretched out to short wheelbase to Gladiator rear links in the back and deadbolt front links up front, which are a little bit shorter than everything else. And so far with all my testing, Gladiator is the best performance I've gotten out of the truck. You're going to need transmission and motor. This just happens to be an aluminum case with steel gears, kind of a generic transmission from, I think it was Amazon. Any stock style SCX 24 transmission will fit on this skid plate. For motors, I've run a ton of different styles on there. The pancake style motors or the really big Furatech motors, I ran into some clearance issues on the front, but again, that depends on your ride height that you're setting the truck at and what other components you're using on here, because I know like certain servos are longer than others, which may cause some clearance issues as well up front. You also need ESC and a receiver. We'll work with the stock 2-in-1 setups. You just won't be able to put them inside the cab like you can with a smaller ESC and receiver. This particular receiver is actually kind of big. There are much smaller ones out there, and I just don't have any more of the micro receivers on hand, so I can't throw it in here. But I was able to get this set up to fit inside the cab, which is kind of what I went for on this design, to have everything as forward as possible. And then drive shafts based on your links that you're going to be running and how stretched out or short everything's going to be. And then for LEDs, there's a couple of options. So you can run the stock LEDs that come in most of the SCX 24s. They just go right into the back of the light bar that comes with the kit. Or you can run, Little Guy Racing Parts makes a 34 millimeter, I think it is, for LED light bar. And that's actually what these little screws and spacers are for, so that you can mount them to the, instead of the light bar that comes in the kit, you can mount this one to the front. Light output on this is a little bit better if you don't do like I did on this, where I did chrome on the inside of there, because they will come just black. Light output was about the same with the stock LEDs and doing chrome in here. It was about the same light output as the Little Guy Racing Parts light bar. So it's up to you. That's if you're running the truck at night or something and you want some lights. It's not necessary for the truck, but I tend to run at night, so I will be putting them on here. All right, I guess with that, wheels and tires. Because it's designed to have the wider axles, you can also run pretty big wheel and tire setups. I have really liked running a 1.3 inch wheel with, these are 70 millimeter tires from Endura. Been really happy with this setup. That's based on the terrain that I run this truck on. Everybody's going to be a little different with what their preferences are. You can run 1 inch and 1 inch plus wheels and tire setups on here. To have a smaller tire, you can run bigger tires than a 70 millimeter. Just depends on what you like and how you drive your truck. But those have been what I've been really happy with so far with all of the testing that I've done on here. All right, so with that, we'll get into the actual build. I like to start with the skid plate on here. My goal for the skid plate, or for the transmission and mounting position, is always to get the motor as centered as possible. The skid plate's reversible, so it doesn't matter which way the motor's facing, as long as you get it basically centered for where you are going to be setting it all up. Alright, so everything is as centered as I'm going to be able to get it. And then I'd just always go ahead and throw this in there first. With the way it's set up, you don't have to worry about being able to put your link screws in, because the holes here are bigger, so you can drop the screws right in there. Alright, once transmission's in, I go for putting the links in, just because it's kind of what I've found to be the easiest. I do upper links first and then throw the lower links in. And then from there we'll go to axles. So on this chassis there are some different options for your upper link mounts. You have 4 different holes there. I always start in this middle one and then adjust as needed based on the caster of the rear axle or front axle as well, because you got the same adjustments on the front. But I'll go over that once the axles go on. I'll show you what the caster angle kind of looks like and what I'm talking about there, because that also helps with stability on the truck if you have caster at the right angle. So one thing to note when you're running screws into the plastic pieces here, or into the printed pieces, don't over tighten them, because you can strip the plastic out. So once you start to feel it get tight, it's good. You don't have to go crazy on making sure they're super tight on there. Alright, so future me here, to remind you to use 8 millimeter screws for your upper link mounts and 10 millimeter screws on your lower link mounts here. And that way you have plenty of clearance for articulation, because if you look on the front here, I don't know if it'll show up on camera, I used the 10 millimeter here, and the link ends are getting caught on the screws there. So, yep, just a little point on there. The bags with all the screws will be labeled as far as length, but yeah, you're going to want to do 10 millimeter for your lowers and 8 millimeter for your uppers here. Alright, from that point we can go ahead and throw the axles on, which will also help give us a really good idea of where the shocks are going to be mounting on here. Alright, now that all of that is on there, we can get to work on the shocks and figure out where we're going to be mounting those. So I always start with the front shocks, because that's where you're going to run into the majority of any of your clearance issues with like links and motor and drive shaft and all that type of stuff. So I start with that, and I essentially just go as low as I possibly can and still have clearance for the drive shaft and links. Alright, so that is as low as I can go in the front because I am running into clearance issues on the upper link. So now from there I can decide ride height in the rear too. And for the back, I always start with trying to level out ride height between the front and the rear. So just gonna start with a position that looks like it might work and then go from there. Alright, so that looks pretty good for now with ride height, but that's gonna get tuned based off of where you're driving it, what you want the truck to feel like, things like that. So that'll change based on how you want the truck to feel. But that's where I like to start. I like to try and start as low as I can possibly go on the ride height and then go from there. Alright, so now we will start doing some of the body panel stuff and different cross supports. I, from this point, start with the front and rear cross supports just to get the limiting straps, because once you kind of have an idea for your ride height, then you can decide where your limiting straps need to go, and like as far as what length they need to be and where you can actually put these supports to work for what you're going for on your truck. So first thing you want to start with is you want to take one of these smaller screws that comes in this kit, and you want to put that, there's a little hole right here in the middle, and this doesn't have to be perfect or anything. That's where your limiting strap's going to hook to. So one of the easiest ones to start with is the rear. I try to go with this rear one as far back as I possibly can, just to make sure that I have plenty of support on that rear section here, because now with all these different pieces, what we're going to be going for is stiffening up the frame a bit. Yeah, so these are stainless steel, but they can definitely bend if you put too much stress on them. So now that's what we're going for, is just stiffening the frame so that there are no issues with it bending or anything like that. So now that that's done, you do have to go back and kind of undo these rear upper links. So the way I do the limiting straps on these kits, and with anything that I do limiting straps on, is I try and keep those straps centered, because that'll keep the suspension from unloading, like when you're going over hills and things like that, but it still allows you to get full articulation side to side without putting at any stress on the actual shocks. So it'll allow it to pivot on that center point, but it still won't just unload when you're going over hills. So like I said, doesn't really want to unload, but you still get plenty of articulation out of it, but it doesn't easily unload that rear shock or that rear axle. So on this front one, what I ended up doing, because of where I wanted the shocks mounted, I ended up using the cross support as the actual shock mount, so I didn't need to use the nuts on the back side of it. And now it's going to be just a matter of figuring out what length limiting strap to use on there. And I think it's going to end up being the medium length ones, but I will figure that out as I start to put it on there. Alright, so now the suspension kind of stays in its lowest position until it starts to articulate, and then it can get into whatever position it needs to be in. Now we can start doing doing all the trays that are going on here. So we'll start with the rear tray. It's the one that has no markings on it at all. It will go back here. There are a lot of places it can go. You can kind of slide it forward and back. Basically, you're just looking to line up two of those screw holes so that you can give it some support in the middle here. This is also if you are running a 2-in-1 receiver and ESC combo, like the stock pieces. You want to move this or keep it kind of a little bit farther back so that you have plenty of mounting surface kind of just like centered on there. And then if you are not running that and you're running smaller ESC and receiver, you can actually move this pretty far forward and it'll still give you plenty of room. All of these are the 5mm screws that come with the kit. All of these panels are going to be that same screw size. So it'll look like that on there. And then I always do the back panel next. Don't know how well it'll show up on there, but there is a logo on there. You can flip this either direction if you want to have that pointed out. You can. If not, you can run it just blank and have the logo inside. And it goes right back here into these screw holes. Also for this back tray, if you are running a brushed setup and you have the motor pointed towards the back, you can push this way back this direction here, so that you have plenty of room for if you're running like a big block motor or an 050 or something like that. It'll give you plenty of clearance for motor placement. And now I'm going to hold off on the roof for a second because that's actually where I'm going to attach my electronics. So I want to get everything kind of up here where it needs to go, plug it all in, and then stick it onto this tray, or the roof piece. So on the roof piece, there is a logo on one side and it's flat on the other. You can put whichever one you want. It's reversible. So it's just up to you how you want to run this truck and if you want to have my logos on there or not. So with this light bar, it's going to be kind of hard to see, but there is a curve to it that matches the curve of the front of the truck. So you just want to make sure you get the right side up when you're putting this on. Depending on the battery setup you're running on here, you can run the battery in the back, or you can do like I did. I run really small batteries here. And you can just stick them on the front onto the actual servo. So another reason why the chassis is a little bit wider is gives you plenty of servo clearance as well as clearance for running a battery on the front. For sticking everything on, I just use some generic, I've always called it servo tape, but it's just a double-sided foam tape. Alright, then you just pull the covers off of the double-sided tape and then stick them to the inside of the chassis. And then you can start dealing with all of your cable management, which can sometimes be a pain in the butt to deal with, but definitely needs to be done. Once all that's done, you can go ahead and put your wheels on, and the build is essentially complete, other than just your own personal preference for tuning and just adjusting parts of the truck. So things to remember: don't over tighten your screws for the plastic pieces because they will strip out because they are just plastic. Even though they're a high quality nylon 3D print, they will still strip. Just, as you're installing stuff, just kind of look over everything. Make sure that you're routing everything how it should be. Think about where things are going to go as you're putting it together. And then go from there. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward build. There's a lot of tuning options. You can kind of play around with how the truck sits quite a bit. So if you have any questions, please feel free to message me or leave a comment down below. If you don't feel like leaving the comment and you want to message me directly, message me on Etsy or Instagram, and I can get back to you. Thanks for watching.